The first gunshot ricocheted off the wooden post beside Wade Forrester's head, showering him with splinters as he dove behind an overturned wagon. Dawn had barely broken over the Montana territory, painting Rattlesnake Ridge in hues of amber and gold, a stark contrast to the violence erupting through its dusty main street. This wasn't how he'd planned to start his morning, but after 3 years of wandering the frontier alone, he'd learned that plans rarely survived contact with reality. "Come on out, Forrester," a voice bellowed from across the street. "The Blackwell Gang ain't leaving till we get what's ours." Wade checked his Colt revolver, 4 bullets left, not enough for the 6 men who had tracked him from Butte. He'd been a fool to think he could rest here even for a night. Every town was the same story, temporary peace followed by inevitable violence. At 30 years old, the former Army scout had learned to expect nothing else. "I don't have your damned money," Wade shouted back, his voice rough from trail dust and lack of water. "Your boss lost it fair in that card game." Another shot splintered the wood near his hiding spot. The townspeople had wisely barricaded themselves inside their homes and businesses, leaving Wade to face his pursuers alone. It wasn't the first time, and if he survived, it wouldn't be the last. The sound of horses approaching from the east momentarily distracted both Wade and his attackers. A stagecoach rolled into town, the driver apparently oblivious to the danger until a bullet whizzed past his head. He yanked the reins hard, bringing the coach to a lurching halt before diving for cover. "Perfect timing," Wade muttered. Now innocent travelers were caught in the crossfire of his troubles. From his position, Wade spotted a young woman emerging from the stagecoach, her expression transitioning from confusion to terror as bullets continued to fly. She wore a sensible traveling dress, her auburn hair pinned beneath a modest hat clearly not prepared for a gunfight. "Get down," Wade shouted, breaking cover just long enough to fire a warning shot toward the Blackwell men, drawing their attention away from the newcomer. The woman didn't hesitate. She gathered her skirts and made a desperate dash toward the nearest building, the general store ducking behind barrels stacked outside its entrance. Wade seized the moment of distraction to change position, sprinting toward the livery stable. A bullet grazed his left arm, tearing through his worn duster and drawing a line of fire across his skin. He gritted his teeth against the pain and kept moving. Inside the stable, he took quick stock of his situation. The wound wasn't deep, but it was bleeding freely, soaking through his shirt. 2 bullets left, 6 angry men outside, and now innocent bystanders. "This town's about to get a whole lot smaller if you don't surrender, Forrester," the gang leader shouted. "We'll burn it to the ground if we have to." Wade knew they weren't bluffing. The Blackwell Gang had developed a reputation for ruthlessness throughout the Montana territory. They'd raised smaller settlements than Rattlesnake Ridge for less provocation than the $500 Wade had won from their leader in a poker game 2 nights ago in Butte. Money he no longer had, having spent most of it on supplies and a new horse after his last one had died crossing the plains. Not that they'd believe him. Wade peered through a crack in the wooden wall. The gang had spread out, 2 men approaching the stable from opposite sides while the others maintained their positions covering the main street. The woman who'd arrived on the stagecoach remained hidden behind the barrels, but it was only a matter of time before she was discovered. The sound of footsteps on hay alerted Wade to someone's presence inside the stable. He whirled around, gun raised, to find himself face to face with an elderly man, the stable master, judging by his leather apron. "There's a back way out," the old man whispered, nodding toward a small door partially hidden by stacked hay bales, and a rifle above the door with ammunition. Wade hesitated. "They'll burn this place down looking for me." "They'll burn it anyway," the old man replied with resignation. "Better you take a few with you before they do." With a grim nod, Wade retrieved the Winchester repeating rifle and a box of ammunition. "Get yourself to safety, old-timer. Been in Rattlesnake Ridge 40 years, the stable master said, his voice tinged with sadness. "Nowhere else to go at my age." Wade couldn't spare time for sympathy. He checked the rifle loaded and ready, then positioned himself near the back entrance. Through another crack in the wall, he could see one of the Blackwell men approaching, a torch in hand. They weren't wasting time with threats anymore. Taking careful aim, Wade squeezed the trigger. The outlaw dropped with a cry, clutching his shoulder. Not a killing shot, but enough to put him out of the fight. The others responded with a barrage of bullets that splintered the stable walls. Wade slipped out the back door during the commotion, circling around to flank the remaining gang members. The main street had become a battlefield, with the Blackwell men using the businesses as cover while taking potshots at the stable. From his new position, Wade had a clear view of the woman behind the barrels. She was trapped, unable to move without exposing herself to gunfire. Worse, one of the outlaws had spotted her and was slowly making his way toward her position. Wade sighted down the rifle barrel and fired. The bullet caught the approaching outlaw in the leg, sending him sprawling into the dirt with a howl of pain. The woman's head snapped up at the sound, her eyes scanning until they locked with Wade's across the street. He motioned urgently for her to run toward him. After only a moment's hesitation, she gathered her courage and ran, skirts hiked above her ankles as she sprinted across the gap between buildings. Bullets kicked up dust at her heels, but she reached Wade's position unharmed, collapsing beside him behind the corner of the blacksmith shop. "Thank you," she gasped, struggling to catch her breath. Her eyes widened as she noticed the blood seeping through his sleeve. "You're hurt." "It's nothing," Wade replied, keeping his attention on the street where the remaining 4 outlaws were regrouping. "You picked a bad day to visit Rattlesnake Ridge, miss." "Violet," she said, seemingly automatically. "Violet Harrington, I'm the new schoolteacher." She gave a humorless laugh. "If there's still a school after this." Before Wade could respond, a voice bellowed from the center of the street. "We've got the old man, Forrester. Come out now or we'll put a bullet in his head." Wade peered around the corner to see the stable master on his knees in the middle of the street, a gun pressed to his temple. The gang leader stood beside him, a cruel smile twisting his features. "They'll kill him whether you go out there or not," Violet whispered, her face pale but her eyes clear and focused. "I know," Wade replied grimly, "but they'll be looking at me, not at you." He handed her the Colt revolver, keeping the rifle for himself. 2 bullets left. "If this goes bad, make them count and then run for the hills." Before she could protest, Wade stepped out into the open, rifle held loosely at his side. "I'm here, Blackwell. Let the old man go." The gang leader, Jasper Blackwell himself, a man Wade had relieved of $500 in a fair game of poker, smiled even wider. "Drop the rifle, Forrester." Wade complied, the Winchester landing in the dust at his feet. "I told you, I don't have your money anymore." "Most of it's gone on supplies." "Then you'll work it off," Blackwell snarled, "or you'll die right here, your choice." Behind him, Wade could sense Violet moving quietly along the side of the building, using his distraction to position herself. He kept his attention fixed on Blackwell, giving no indication of her movements. "Let the old man go first," Wade insisted. "He's got nothing to do with this." Surprisingly, Blackwell shrugged and released his grip on the stable master. "Go on, old man, this ain't your fight." The stable master hesitated, looking at Wade with guilt in his rheumy eyes. Wade nodded almost imperceptibly, and the old man shuffled away, disappearing into one of the buildings lining the street. "Now then," Blackwell continued, leveling his pistol at Wade's chest. "About that debt," a shot rang out, not from Blackwell's gun but from behind the water trough where one of his men had positioned himself. The outlaw fell forward, revealing Violet standing behind him, Wade's Colt still raised and smoking. The distraction was all Wade needed. He dove for the Winchester, rolled to his feet, and fired in one fluid motion. Blackwell's gun arm jerked as the bullet found its mark, his weapon discharging harmlessly into the dirt. The remaining 2 gang members opened fire, forcing Wade back into cover. Violet had already disappeared back behind the blacksmith shop, showing more tactical sense than many soldiers Wade had known. For several tense minutes, silence fell over Rattlesnake Ridge, broken only by Blackwell's curses as he clutched his bleeding arm. Wade used the time to reload the Winchester with the ammunition he'd taken from the stable. "You should run while you can," Violet whispered when he rejoined her. I can create another distraction. Wade shook his head. This ends here. If I run, they'll just follow or worse, take their frustration out on the town. He checked the rifle action. 2 down, 1 wounded, 3 still active including Blackwell. Better odds than I started with. Thanks to me, Violet pointed out, a hint of pride breaking through her fear. Despite the situation, Wade found himself smiling. Yes, madam, thanks to you. A crash from the main street interrupted their whispered conference. Wade risked a glance around the corner to see one of the Blackwell men kicking in the door of the general store, presumably looking for hostages. Wait here, Wade ordered, already moving toward the back of the buildings. Violet grabbed his arm. There's another way, she said urgently. I saw it from the stagecoach, the water tower at the end of the street if you could hit it from here. Wade followed her gaze to the rickety wooden tower supporting a large water tank that supplied the town. It stood at the far end of the main street, positioned so that any leak or rupture would send water cascading down the slight incline of Rattlesnake Ridge's only thoroughfare. That's at least 300 yards, Wade muttered, calculating angles and wind in his head. Can you make it? Violet asked. Wade assessed the Winchester in his hands. It was a good rifle, well-maintained with a clear sight line. Maybe. But why? Because they're all in the street now, Violet explained, pointing discreetly. Sure enough, the Blackwell men had regrouped in the center of town, Jasper shouting orders despite his wounded arm. Wade understood immediately. A sudden flood would scatter them, create chaos, and give him the opening he needed. It was clever, possibly even brilliant. Miss Harrington, he said with genuine admiration, I believe you've missed your calling. The army could use tactical minds like yours. A faint blush colored her cheeks. Just trying to survive, Mr. Forrester. Wade positioned himself, bracing the rifle against the corner of the building. The distance was at the far edge of the weapon's effective range, especially with the crosswind that had picked up. He drew a slow breath, sighted the support struts of the water tower, and squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed across Rattlesnake Ridge. For a moment, nothing happened. Then came the groan of splintering wood as one of the tower's main supports cracked. The Blackwell men looked up just as the tower began to tilt, the massive tank sliding free of its moorings. Water exploded across the main street in a miniature flood, sweeping 2 of the outlaws off their feet. Blackwell and the remaining man staggered backward, momentarily blinded by the deluge. Wade was already moving, rifle raised. He fired twice more in quick succession, dropping one man with a shot to the chest and winging the other in the side. Only Blackwell remained, struggling to aim his pistol with his uninjured arm. Their eyes met across the water-logged street, recognition and hatred burning in Blackwell's gaze. He managed to level his gun just as Wade's final shot caught him square in the shoulder of his good arm. Blackwell collapsed, his weapon falling uselessly beside him. Silence fell over Rattlesnake Ridge, broken only by the gurgle of water flowing down the street and the moans of the wounded outlaws. Cautiously, townspeople began to emerge from their hiding places, staring in disbelief at the scene before them. Wade approached Blackwell, rifle trained steadily on the outlaw leader. It's over, Jasper. You lost more than $500 today. Blackwell spat blood onto the muddy ground. This ain't over, Forrester, not by a long shot. The local sheriff, conspicuously absent during the gunfight, finally appeared with 2 deputies. They began rounding up the surviving Blackwell men, tying makeshift bandages around their wounds before shackling them. I'll take it from here, stranger, the sheriff said to Wade, not quite meeting his eyes. We're obliged for your help, but trouble follows men like you. Best you move on once you're patched up. Wade wasn't surprised. It was the same in every town, grateful for his gun when needed, eager to see his back once the danger passed. He nodded curtly and turned away, only to find Violet Harrington standing behind him, holding a cloth to staunch the blood still seeping from his arm. You need medical attention, she said firmly, ignoring his attempt to pull away. And probably food and rest. The stagecoach won't leave until tomorrow at the earliest, so I insist you let me help you. Before Wade could argue, the stable master approached, his weathered face creased with gratitude. "My place is yours for as long as you need, son. Least I can do after you saved the whole town." Others joined in, offering food, bandages, and whiskey for the pain. It was an unusual reception for Wade, who had grown accustomed to suspicion and fear following in his wake. As the adrenaline of battle faded, the pain in his arm intensified. Wade allowed himself to be led to the town's small medical office, where the doctor, a gruff man with skilled hands, cleaned and stitched his wound while Violet waited outside. "You're lucky," the doctor commented as he tied off the last suture. "Inch to the left and it would have hit the artery." "You'd have bled out before the shooting stopped," Wade merely nodded. Luck had kept him alive more times than he could count, though he'd long since stopped believing it would last. When he emerged from the doctor's office, arm bandaged and pain dulled by whiskey, Violet was waiting with a steaming cup of coffee. The simple gesture, so ordinary in its kindness, caught Wade off guard more effectively than any bullet. "Black with a little sugar," she said, offering him the cup. "You look like you need it." Wade accepted the coffee, their fingers brushing briefly during the exchange. "Thank you, Miss Harrington." "Violet," she corrected him with a small smile. "I think we're beyond formalities after facing down outlaws together." The coffee was strong and hot, exactly what he needed. Wade savored it as they walked slowly down the boardwalk, away from the cleanup still happening in the main street. "You're good with that rifle," Violet observed. "Military?" Wade nodded. "Army Scout." "Served under General Crook during the campaigns against the Sioux and Cheyenne." "And now?" she asked. Wade shrugged his uninjured shoulder. "Now I drift, pick up work where I can find it, stay ahead of trouble." He glanced sideways at her, or behind it apparently. Violet laughed, the sound incongruously bright against the backdrop of the day's violence. "I came to Rattlesnake Ridge expecting quiet frontier life, a small school, simple people." She gestured toward the water-damaged street. "Not this. The West isn't what people back east imagine," Wade said. "It's harsher, unforgiving. And yet beautiful," Violet countered, gesturing toward the mountains visible beyond the town, their peaks still touched with spring snow. "I don't regret coming." They reached the boarding house where Violet had arranged accommodation. It was a modest two-story building with a freshly painted sign announcing "Clean Rooms, Respectable Establishment" in bold letters. "Will you stay?" Violet asked abruptly. "In Rattlesnake Ridge, I mean." Wade finished his coffee, considering the question. The logical answer was no. Towns where he'd engaged in gunfights rarely welcomed his continued presence, regardless of which side he'd fought on. And there was always the chance that more of Blackwell's men would come looking for revenge. "I don't usually stay anywhere long," he admitted. Disappointment flickered across Violet's face before she masked it with a polite smile. "Of course. Well, if you're still here tomorrow, perhaps you join me for breakfast, as thanks for saving my life." Before Wade could respond, the town mayor approached, a portly man in an ill-fitting suit who introduced himself as Hiram Wilson. "Mr. Forrester," he began, pomposity barely concealing his nervousness. "On behalf of Rattlesnake Ridge, I wish to extend our gratitude for your intervention today. The Blackwell Gang has terrorized settlements throughout the territory. Having their leader behind bars will bring great relief to many communities." Wade nodded acknowledgement, waiting for the inevitable request for him to move on. Instead, the mayor surprised him. "Our town has been without a proper lawman for some time. Sheriff Dawson and his deputies are." He glanced around before lowering his voice, "less than adequate when real trouble comes. The town council would be willing to offer you the position of marshal, with appropriate compensation, of course." The offer stunned Wade into momentary silence. He'd been hired as a temporary guard before, but never offered a permanent position of authority. "Mr. Wilson, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not a lawman, just passing through." The mayor's expression grew shrewd. "Consider it at least." "Rattlesnake Ridge is growing. The new schoolhouse will be completed by month's end." He nodded toward Violet. "The railroad spur from Butte is scheduled to reach us by fall, and the silver mine up north has new investors." We need someone who can handle trouble when it comes." With that, Wilson tipped his hat to Violet and continued down the street, leaving Wade to contemplate an unexpected crossroads in his drifter's existence. "It seems I'm not the only one who thinks you should stay," Violet observed, a hint of teasing in her voice. Wade found himself oddly reluctant to dismiss the idea outright. "I'll think about it." Violet smiled, genuinely this time. "Good, until tomorrow then." She indicated the boarding house behind her. "Until tomorrow," Wade agreed, surprised to find himself looking forward to it. As Violet disappeared inside the boarding house, Wade stood for a long moment on the boardwalk, the empty coffee cup still warm in his hands. For the first time in years, the road ahead didn't seem like his only option. The stable master had prepared a small room above the livery for Wade, humble but clean. As night fell over Rattlesnake Ridge, Wade cleaned his weapons by lamplight, listening to the sounds of the town settling after its ordeal. From his window, he could see the boarding house where Violet was staying, a soft light glowing behind drawn curtains. The image of her standing fearlessly with his revolver, creating a distraction when he needed it most, returned unbidden to his mind. She was unlike any schoolteacher he'd ever encountered. Sleep came slowly, interrupted by the familiar dreams of battles past Sioux warriors, desperate settlers, the endless cycle of violence that had defined his adult life. But for once, the nightmares were tempered by something new. A pair of determined eyes and the simple kindness of offered coffee. Morning brought clear skies and the scent of fresh bread from the town bakery. Wade dressed, strapping his holster over his injured arm with only minimal discomfort, and made his way to the boarding house. Violet was already waiting on the porch, dressed in a simple blue dress that complemented her auburn hair, now styled more neatly than during yesterday's chaos. "Good morning, Mr. Forrester," she greeted him, smiling. "I hope you slept well despite your injury." "Well enough," Wade replied, suddenly conscious of his trail-worn appearance beside her freshness. "And please call me Wade." They walked to the town's only restaurant, a small establishment attached to the hotel. The other patrons fell silent as they entered, all eyes turning to Wade with a mixture of awe and wariness. Word of the mayor's offer had clearly spread overnight. Once seated, Violet wasted no time addressing the elephant in the room. "Have you given any thought to the marshal position?" Wade cut into the steak and eggs the waitress had brought without being asked. "Some. It's not the kind of offer I usually get." "What do you usually get?" Violet asked. "A day's pay for a day's work, if I'm lucky. More often, I get shown the town limits and told not to come back." He met her gaze directly. "My reputation isn't built on peaceful resolutions, Miss Harrington." "Violet," she corrected automatically. "And from what I saw yesterday, your reputation is well earned, but that doesn't mean it defines your future." Wade studied her, curious about the schoolteacher who spoke with such certainty about second chances. "What brought you to Montana Territory?" "Teachers are usually Eastern women looking for adventure or widows needing employment." "I'm neither," Violet replied, sipping her tea. "My father was a professor at a women's college in Boston. I grew up surrounded by books and ideas, expected to follow his academic path." A shadow crossed her face. "When he died last year, I realized I'd been living his dream, not mine. I wanted something real, a place where education truly changes lives, not just refines already privileged minds. And you found that in Rattlesnake Ridge." Wade couldn't keep the skepticism from his voice. Violet's expression grew determined. "I intend to. The children here deserve the same opportunities as any in Boston or New York, more perhaps because their futures aren't predetermined by social standing." Her passion was evident, burning bright beneath her composed exterior. Wade found himself admiring it and her more than he'd expected. "You still haven't answered my question," Violet pointed out. "About staying." Wade set down his fork, considering his words carefully. "I've been moving for so long, I'm not sure I remember how to stay in one place." "Perhaps you just haven't found the right reason yet," Violet suggested. Before Wade could respond, the restaurant door burst open and a young boy rushed in, face flushed with excitement. "Mr. Forrester." "Sheriff wants you right away," the boy exclaimed. "Riders coming from the east looks like more of Blackwell's men." Wade was on his feet instantly, checking his revolver. "How many?" "4, maybe 5, the boy replied. "Sheriff's deputizing anyone who can shoot straight." Violet stood as well, her breakfast forgotten. "Will there be another gunfight?" "Not if they're smart," Wade replied grimly. "But the Blackwell Gang isn't known for intelligence." He turned to Violet, suddenly reluctant to leave her. "Stay inside, away from windows." "If shooting starts, I remember what to do," she interrupted, her expression resolute. "I'll help get the townspeople to safety." Wade nodded, respecting her competence even as concern tightened his chest. With a last look at Violet, he followed the boy out into the street. Sheriff Dawson had positioned his deputies and several armed townsmen at strategic points along the main street. The approaching riders were visible now, dust rising behind them as they approached Rattlesnake Ridge at a steady pace. "Thought you'd want to be part of this, Forrester," Dawson said as Wade joined him in front of the jail. The sheriff's tone suggested he was less than thrilled with Wade's involvement but saw no alternative. "Depends what this is," Wade replied coolly. "If you're planning an ambush, I'd advise against it. That'll just start another shooting match you might not win," Dawson bristled. "This is my town, and those are Blackwell's men," Wade cut him off. "They're coming for their boss and they're wounded, not to mention revenge." "Let me talk to them first." The sheriff looked like he wanted to argue, but finally gave a curt nod. "Your funeral if they're not in a talking mood." Wade walked to the center of the street, positioning himself where the approaching riders would see him clearly. His left hand rested casually near his holster, but he kept his right hand visible and empty, a gesture that could be read as either peaceful or confident, depending on the viewer's inclinations. The riders slowed as they entered town, clearly assessing the armed men positioned along the street. Wade recognized the leader, Caleb Rawlins, Blackwell's second-in-command and a man with a reputation nearly as bloody as his boss. "That's far enough," Wade called when they were still 20 yards away. The riders halted, Rawlins studying Wade with cold eyes. "You must be Forrester." "Jasper said you were good with a gun." "Good enough," Wade replied evenly. "Your boss and 2 of your men are in that jail, another is dead, the rest are nursing wounds that will heal in time for their hangings." Rawlins spat into the dust. "We came to take them home." "That's not happening," Wade said. "But I'm offering you a choice. Ride away now and no one else dies today. Try to free them and we'll bury you beside your friend." One of Rawlins' men reached toward his holster, but Rawlins raised a hand, stopping him. His eyes narrowed as he assessed the armed townspeople visible from his position. Whatever he saw must have convinced him that the odds weren't favorable. "This ain't over," Rawlins growled. "Blackwell has friends all over the territory. They'll come calling." "They'll find the same reception you did," Wade promised. "Only with less talking first." For a tense moment, it seemed Rawlins might ignore the warning in Wade's voice. Then he abruptly wheeled his horse around. "Let's go, boys. We'll come back when the odds are better." The riders departed as quickly as they had come, dust settling in their wake. Wade watched until they were specks on the horizon before turning back to the sheriff. "They'll be back," he stated flatly. "With more men, you'd better get those prisoners to Bud as soon as possible." Sheriff Dawson nodded grudgingly. "I'll arrange a prisoner transport today, and—" He hesitated, pride warring with practicality. "I appreciate the assistance." Wade acknowledged the belated thanks with a nod and walked back toward the restaurant, where Violet stood waiting on the boardwalk, relief evident in her expression. "That was impressive," she said as he approached. "Not a shot fired. This time," Wade replied. "Next time might be different." Violet studied him thoughtfully. "Is that why you've never settled anywhere, always anticipating the next fight?" The question hit closer to home than Wade expected. "Partly," he admitted. "The war against the tribes taught me that peace is temporary. There's always another battle coming." "That's a lonely way to live," Violet observed without judgment. Before Wade could respond, Mayor Wilson hustled up to them, face flushed with excitement. "Mr. Forrester, masterfully handled. You've proven my point exactly. Rattlesnake Ridge needs a man of your capabilities." He thrust out a hand. What do you say? Will you accept the position of town marshal? Wade looked from the mayor's eager face to Violet's carefully neutral one. The decision he'd been avoiding since yesterday suddenly demanded an answer. I'll stay through the month, he said finally. See how it suits me, but I make no promises beyond that. Wilson's face split into a broad smile. Excellent. I'll inform the town council immediately. We can have you sworn in by sundown. He pumped Wade's hand enthusiastically before hurrying away. A month, Violet repeated softly once the mayor had gone. It's a start. Wade found himself wanting to explain to make her understand his reluctance. The Blackwell Gang won't forget what happened here. As marshal, I'd be painting a target on Rattlesnake Ridge. The target was already there, Violet pointed out, but now the town has someone who can defend it properly. She smiled, a hint of mischief in her eyes. Besides, I believe you owe me the rest of that breakfast, Marshal Forrester. The title sounded strange to Wade's ears, but not entirely unwelcome. They returned to their interrupted meal, the conversation turning to more ordinary topics: the progress of the schoolhouse construction, the town's history, the changing seasons in Montana territory. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Wade found himself engaged in conversation that had nothing to do with danger or survival. Violet was well-read and articulate, but she listened as much as she spoke, genuinely interested in Wade's experiences during his years of wandering. By the time they finished, the sun was high overhead, and Wade was surprised to realize how much time had passed. I should check on the prisoners, he said reluctantly. Make sure the sheriff is actually arranging that transport. Violet nodded in understanding. And I should meet with the school board about finalizing the curriculum before classes begin. She hesitated before adding, perhaps we could continue our conversation over dinner. The hotel serves a decent stew in the evenings. Wade found himself agreeing before he'd consciously decided to do so. I'd like that. They parted ways on the boardwalk, each heading toward their respective responsibilities. Wade was halfway to the jail when he realized he was looking forward to the evening in a way he hadn't anticipated anything in years. The rest of the day passed in a whirlwind of activity. True to his word, Sheriff Dawson organized a heavily armed escort to transport Blackwell and his men to Butte, where the territorial court would handle their cases. Wade supervised the loading of the prisoners onto the wagon, taking grim satisfaction in the hatred burning in Blackwell's eyes. You've made a grave mistake, Forrester, the outlaw leader hissed as deputies secured his shackles to the wagon floor. My boys will burn this town to the ground and save you for last. Wade leaned in close, speaking for Blackwell's ears only. Your boys already tried once. Next time, they won't walk away at all. As the prison wagon departed under guard, Wade turned his attention to his new responsibilities. Mayor Wilson provided a tour of the town, introducing him to business owners and prominent citizens. Most seemed cautiously optimistic about their new marshal, though a few friends of Sheriff Dawson, Wade suspected, were openly skeptical. The marshal's office was a small building adjacent to the jail, containing a desk, gun rack, and little else. The previous marshal had been killed 6 months earlier during an attempted bank robbery, and no one had permanently filled the position since. Sheriff Dawson wasn't pleased about being passed over, Wilson confided as he handed Wade the marshal's badge, a simple silver star that had been polished for the occasion. But the town council voted unanimously after your handling of both confrontations. We need someone who commands respect. Wade pinned the badge to his vest, its weight unfamiliar but not uncomfortable. I'll do the job as long as I'm here, he said, but I meant what I said about the month trial. Wilson waved a dismissive hand. Once you've settled in, I'm confident you'll find Rattlesnake Ridge worth staying for. We're a growing community with much to offer. After completing the administrative details of his appointment, Wade spent the remainder of the afternoon familiarizing himself with the town's layout, noting potential trouble spots and defensible positions, a habit from his scouting days that had saved his life more than once. Rattlesnake Ridge was larger than it first appeared, with nearly 500 residents spread between the main street and outlying homesteads. The silver mine 3 miles north employed most of the men, while a sawmill on the eastern edge processed timber from the surrounding forests. It was, as the mayor had said, a town with prospects. As promised, Wade met Violet for dinner at the hotel restaurant. She had changed into a green dress that highlighted the auburn tones in her hair, and Wade found himself momentarily at a loss for words when she entered. "Marshal Forrester," she greeted him with a smile, nodding toward the badge on his vest. "It suits you." "It feels strange," Wade admitted as they were seated. "I've spent so long answering to no one but myself, and now you're responsible for everyone in Rattlesnake Ridge," Violet observed. "That's quite a change." The dinner conversation flowed as easily as it had at breakfast, ranging from local gossip to broader discussions of territorial politics, and the changes coming with increased settlement. Wade found himself relaxing in Violet's company, her intelligence and humor drawing him out of his habitual reserve. "I start teaching next week," she said as they lingered over coffee. 28 students ranging from 6 to 16 years old, most have had little formal education. "That's a challenge," Wade noted. "Children that age with different backgrounds and needs." Violet's eyes lit up with enthusiasm. "Yes, but that's what makes it exciting. These children are hungry for knowledge, not just reading and arithmetic, but understanding the world beyond Montana territory." She leaned forward slightly. "Would you consider speaking to my class sometime? Your experiences as an Army scout would fascinate them." Wade hesitated. "I'm not sure my stories are suitable for children." "You'd be surprised what children in frontier towns already understand about life's harsher realities," Violet replied. "But you could focus on the geography, the different tribes and their customs, the natural features you've encountered in your travels." Put that way, it seemed less problematic. "I'll think about it," Wade promised. Their evening ended with Wade escorting Violet back to the boarding house. The spring night was cool but pleasant, stars emerging in a clear sky above the silhouettes of distant mountains. "Thank you for dinner," Violet said as they reached the porch steps. "And for the company." "The pleasure was mine," Wade replied, surprised by how sincerely he meant it. Violet hesitated, seeming to debate something internally before speaking again. "I know you've only committed to a month, but I'm glad you're staying even that long. Rattlesnake Ridge needs someone like you." In the lamplight spilling from the boarding house windows, her eyes held a warmth that stirred something long dormant in Wade's chest. "Good night, Violet." "Good night, Marshal," she replied with a small smile before disappearing inside. Wade's path back to his room above the livery took him through the now quiet Main Street. The marshal's badge caught the moonlight as he walked, a tangible reminder of the unexpected turn his life had taken in just 2 days. For the first time in years, the road ahead seemed less important than the place where he now stood. The following weeks brought a routine unlike any Wade had known since leaving the Army. Each morning began with a patrol of Rattlesnake Ridge's streets, nodding to shopkeepers opening their businesses and workers heading toward the mine or sawmill. Afternoons were spent handling minor disputes, checking on outlying homesteads, or simply being visible a deterrent to trouble through his mere presence. Word of the Blackwell Gang's defeat spread quickly throughout the territory. The Helena newspaper ran a front-page story about the gunfight and subsequent capture, painting Wade as a frontier hero who had single-handedly brought the notorious Outlaws to justice. The article exaggerated his role and minimized the contributions of the townspeople, particularly Violet, but it served to enhance his reputation as a man not to be crossed. Sheriff Dawson, whose jurisdiction covered the entire county but who spent most of his time in Rattlesnake Ridge, maintained a cool professional relationship with Wade. The older lawman clearly resented being upstaged, but was experienced enough to recognize the value of having a skilled gun hand as town marshal. "Blackwell and his boys will hang next month in Helena," Dawson informed Wade 3 weeks into his tenure. "Governor wants to make an example of them." Wade nodded, unsurprised. "Any word on Rollins and the others who got away?" Dawson shook his head. Nothing specific, but rumors say they've joined up with the Coulter brothers over near the Idaho border. Bad business if true. The Coulters run the biggest rustling operation in the territory. The news confirmed Wade's suspicion that Rattlesnake Ridge hadn't seen the last of Blackwell's associates. He increased his vigilance, establishing regular patrols and organizing a volunteer citizens committee to serve as deputies if needed. Throughout these weeks, Wade's friendship with Violet deepened. They took to having dinner together most evenings, sometimes at the hotel restaurant, other times picnicking by the creek that ran behind the newly completed schoolhouse. Wade found himself sharing stories he'd told no one else about his childhood in Pennsylvania, his reasons for heading west after the Civil War, the loneliness of the scout's life. In return, Violet spoke of her sheltered upbringing in academic Boston, her father's expectations and her own deferred dreams, her determination to build something meaningful in this remote corner of the territory. The schoolhouse opened with a town celebration, complete with speeches from Mayor Wilson and a ribbon-cutting ceremony where Violet beamed with pride as her students filed inside for their first lessons. Wade watched from the edge of the crowd, oddly moved by her obvious joy. True to his word, Wade visited the school during its second week to speak about his travels. He arrived nervous about addressing so many young faces, but found himself enjoying their eager questions about buffalo herds, mountain passes, and native customs. Violet watched from her desk, approval evident in her smile. "You're a natural teacher," she told him afterward as they walked back toward town. The children were enthralled. Wade shook his head, embarrassed by the praise. They were just excited to escape their normal lessons. "Perhaps," Violet conceded, "but you showed them a world beyond Rattlesnake Ridge. That's valuable, especially for children who may never travel far from here." As his first month as marshal neared its end, Wade found himself increasingly reluctant to contemplate leaving. Rattlesnake Ridge had begun to feel, if not exactly like home, then at least like somewhere he belonged. The townspeople had largely accepted him, some even seeking his company rather than merely his protection. He developed habits and routines, favorite spots, and preferred paths. And then there was Violet. He hadn't intended to form attachments, knowing his history of departures. But her intelligence, courage, and quiet strength had worn down his defenses. Wade knew his growing feelings for the schoolteacher were a complication he hadn't anticipated when accepting the marshal's position. The deadline he'd set approached inexorably. The night before his month would conclude, Wade sat alone in the marshal's office, cleaning his revolver by lamplight and contemplating his decision. The door opened without a knock and Violet entered, carrying a covered basket. "I thought you might be hungry," she said, setting the basket on his desk and removing a cloth to reveal fresh bread, cheese, and 2 slices of apple pie. "You missed dinner at the hotel." Wade set aside his gun cleaning materials and smiled. "Thank you, I lost track of time." Violet took the chair opposite his desk, her expression serious despite her casual tone. Thinking about tomorrow, there was no point denying it. Yes, silence stretched between them, comfortable yet charged with unspoken questions. Finally, Violet spoke again. "The school board has asked me to establish an evening class for adults who want to improve their reading and writing. Several miners and loggers have expressed interest." The apparent change of subject confused Wade. "That's good. Education is important at any age." "It would mean I'd be walking back to the boarding house after dark 3 nights a week," Violet continued. "Mrs. Peterson at the boarding house is concerned about my safety," understanding dawned. "You're hoping the marshal might escort you." "Only if he's planning to stay in Rattlesnake Ridge," Violet replied, meeting his gaze directly. The question she wasn't asking hung in the air between them. Before Wade could respond, rapid footsteps sounded on the boardwalk outside and the door burst open again. A young miner stood in the doorway, breathing hard. "Marshal," riders approaching from the south, at least a dozen, moving fast with torches. Wade was on his feet instantly, strapping on his gun belt. "Sound the alarm. Get everyone inside, away from the main street." He turned to Violet, urgency replacing their previous conversation. Go to the school and stay there. It's stone, less likely to burn. She stood, fear evident in her eyes, but her voice steady. Be careful, Wade. He nodded once before following the miner outside. The night had turned suddenly from peaceful to perilous, the distant glow of approaching torches visible against the dark landscape south of town. Sheriff Dawson emerged from the saloon, buckling on his own gun belt. Blackwell's men, likely, Wade confirmed, with reinforcements. Get your deputies and any armed men you trust. Position them along the rooftops on both sides of the street. For once, Dawson didn't argue, hurrying to carry out Wade's instructions. Within minutes, Rattlesnake Ridge transformed from a sleeping town to an armed camp, men with rifles taking up defensive positions while women and children sought shelter in the sturdiest buildings. Wade stationed himself in the center of the street, directly in the path of the approaching riders. From here, he could direct the defense and serve as the initial target, drawing fire away from the hidden defenders if shooting started. The riders slowed as they approached the town limits, perhaps sensing the trap. As they came into clearer view, Wade recognized Caleb Rollins at their head, alongside two men he didn't know but whose bearings suggested leadership. That's far enough, Wade called when they were within earshot. Rollins raised a hand and the group halted about 50 yards from Wade's position. We came for a reckoning, Forrester, he shouted. Jasper Blackwell hangs in a week. His blood's on your hands. He earned that rope all by himself, Wade replied, voice carrying in the still night. Just like you're earning yours right now. There are 20 rifles trained on your position. Turn around and ride away while you still can. One of the unknown men spurred his horse forward a few steps. He was older than the others, with a weather-beaten face and cold eyes. You don't know who you're dealing with, lawman. The name's Silas Coulter. This territory belongs to me and my brothers, not some upstart town with delusions of importance. The Coulter brothers. Just as Sheriff Dawson had feared, Rollins had joined forces with the most notorious rustlers in the territory. The situation had just become considerably more dangerous. Rattlesnake Ridge is under my protection, Wade stated flatly. You're not welcome here, Coulter laughed, an ugly sound without humor. Protection, 1 man against 15. Those are poor odds, Marshal. Better than you think, Wade replied. Your men are bunched together in the open. My people are dug in with cover. First shot fired, half your riders die before they can clear leather. A tense silence followed as Coulter assessed the situation. Wade knew he was bluffing. The town's defenders were fewer and less experienced than he claimed, but in the darkness, with potential ambushers hidden, the outlaw couldn't be certain. We didn't come to die tonight, Coulter finally said. But this isn't over, Marshal. Rattlesnake Ridge has made enemies it can't afford. He turned to Rollins. We'll deal with this town properly, with planning and numbers that guarantee success. Rollins looked like he wanted to argue but ultimately deferred to the older outlaw. With venomous glares toward Wade, the riders slowly turned their mounts and retreated into the darkness, torches dwindling to distant pinpricks of light. Only when they were well beyond rifle range did Wade allow himself to exhale. The town had been granted a reprieve, but the threat had merely been postponed, not eliminated. Sheriff Dawson approached, relief evident in his stance. That was well handled, Forrester. They'll be back, though. Yes, Wade agreed grimly, with more men and a better plan. The Coulter brothers don't make idle threats. Gradually, the townspeople emerged from their shelters, gathering in small groups to discuss the narrowly averted attack. Mayor Wilson hurried toward Wade, face pale in the lamplight. Is it true? The Coulters themselves came to threaten Rattlesnake Ridge, Wade nodded. Silas Coulter, at least, he's allied with what's left of the Blackwell Gang. The mayor ran a hand through his thinning hair. This is disastrous. The Coulters control half the criminal activity in the territory. They have dozens of men at their disposal. Which is why we need to prepare, Wade said firmly. Fortify the town, establish proper watches, train anyone willing to handle a weapon. Wilson looked skeptical. We're not soldiers, Marshal. We're miners, shopkeepers, farmers. You'll be dead if the Coulters return and find you unprepared, Wade replied bluntly. I've seen what men like that do to undefended settlements. The discussion continued as they walked back toward the center of town, the immediate danger past but a greater one looming on the horizon. Wade detailed his plans for improving the town's defenses, drawing on his military experience to outline a strategy that might give Rattlesnake Ridge a fighting chance. Near the schoolhouse, Wade spotted Violet standing with a small group of women, distributing coffee to the men who had taken up arms in defense of the town. When she saw him approaching, the relief on her face was palpable. "You're unharmed," she said simply when he reached her. "They decided not to test our defenses tonight," Wade explained, "but they'll be back, better prepared and in greater numbers." Violet handed him a steaming cup, their fingers brushing during the exchange. "Then we'll be better prepared as well." The simple certainty in her voice, the unconscious use of we instead of you, crystallized Wade's decision. He'd been weighing his options, calculating risks and rewards as he'd learned to do during his years of wandering. But in that moment, looking at Violet's determined expression in the lamplight, the scale tipped decisively. "Yes," he agreed, "we will." The following morning, Wade reported to Mayor Wilson's office as scheduled, the end of his trial month having arrived despite the previous night's disruption. Wilson greeted him with obvious anxiety. "Marshal Forrester, in light of recent events, the town council has authorized me to offer you a significant increase in salary if you'll agree to remain in your position. We understand the danger is greater than anticipated when you were initially hired." Wade listened to the mayor's nervous pitch without interrupting. When Wilson finally ran out of words, Wade simply nodded. "I'll stay," he said, "not for the money, but because Rattlesnake Ridge deserves a fighting chance against the Coulters." The relief on Wilson's face was almost comical. "Excellent. I'll inform the council immediately. Whatever resources you need for the town's defense will be provided within our means, of course. I'll need authority to organize mandatory firearms training, establish checkpoints on all roads into town, and requisition materials for barricades," Wade began, outlining the measures he deemed necessary. By midday, word had spread throughout Rattlesnake Ridge that Marshal Forrester was staying permanently. The news seemed to lift a weight from the community, residents approaching Wade with renewed confidence despite the looming threat of the Coulter brothers' return. In the weeks that followed, Wade transformed Rattlesnake Ridge from an ordinary frontier town into a defensible stronghold. Every able-bodied man received basic training with rifles and revolvers. Strategic buildings were reinforced with sandbagged firing positions. Regular patrols monitored the surrounding countryside for signs of approaching danger. Throughout this transformation, Violet remained a constant presence in Wade's life. Her evening classes for adult education began as planned, with Wade escorting her home afterward as both protection and opportunity for conversation. They continued their habit of sharing meals, though now their discussions often revolved around the town's situation and preparations. One evening in late summer, as they walked from the schoolhouse after Violet's adult class had concluded, she broached a subject they'd been circling for weeks. "The Hendersons have invited us to Sunday dinner," she said casually, "as a couple." Wade glanced at her, noting the careful neutrality of her expression. "People are talking, I suppose. People always talk in small towns," Violet replied. "The question is whether they're right to do so." They had reached the creek behind the schoolhouse, their usual route offering privacy away from the town's curious eyes. Wade stopped, turning to face her directly. "What are you asking, Violet?" She met his gaze unflinchingly. "I'm asking what I am to you, Wade, a friend. A convenient dinner companion, or something more?" The question hung between them in the warm evening air. Wade had faced armed outlaws with less trepidation than he felt in this moment of emotional honesty. "When I rode into Rattlesnake Ridge," he said slowly, "I was a man with no connections, no future beyond the next town. I'd learned not to want those things because wanting leads to losing." He took a deep breath. "Then you handed me that cup of coffee and something changed." I started to see possibilities I'd closed myself off from years ago. Violet's expression softened. And now I find myself thinking about more than just survival, Wade admitted. I think about building something here, not just defenses against outlaws, but a life, a future. He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers entwining with hers. With you, if you want that too. The smile that illuminated Violet's face was answer enough, but she stepped closer nonetheless. I do want that, Wade, more than I expected to when I came to Montana territory looking for purpose. Their first kiss was gentle, a promise exchanged in the fading light beside the creek where they'd shared so many conversations. When they parted, Wade felt a certainty he hadn't known in years, perhaps ever. We should accept the Hendersons' invitation, he said, a smile tugging at his lips. Give the town something new to talk about. Violet laughed, the sound bright in the gathering dusk. They'll be absolutely insufferable about being right. Hand in hand, they walked back toward town, the path ahead suddenly clearer than it had been hours before. Their courtship progressed with a frontier practicality that suited them both. Wade continued his duties as marshal while preparing the town for the inevitable confrontation with the Coulter gang. Violet taught her expanding roster of students, both children during the day and adults 3 evenings a week. They spent their free time together, getting to know each other beyond the crisis that had initially thrown them together. Wade discovered Violet's passionate interest in natural sciences, particularly botany, while she learned of his unexpected talent for woodworking, a skill acquired during long, lonely winters as an Army scout. In late September, as autumn painted the surrounding forests in hues of gold and crimson, Governor Hammond himself visited Rattlesnake Ridge. His entourage included a detachment of territorial marshals and a journalist from the Helena newspaper. Marshal Forrester, the governor greeted Wade warmly in the town hall where a reception had been hastily arranged. Your reputation grows with each telling. First the Blackwell Gang, now standing up to the Coulters themselves. Wade accepted the handshake with appropriate respect but tempered enthusiasm. The situation remains dangerous, Governor. The Coulters haven't forgotten their threat. Indeed not, Hammond agreed, his expression growing serious, which is why I've come. The territorial legislature has authorized a special task force to deal with the Coulter brothers once and for all. The recent hanging of Jasper Blackwell has emboldened us to tackle larger criminal enterprises. He clapped Wade on the shoulder, and I want you to lead it. The offer caught Wade completely off guard. Sir, a special commission as Chief Territorial Marshal, Hammond elaborated, authority to recruit deputies, requisition supplies, and pursue the Coulters wherever they hide. Helena wants these rustlers brought to justice, and you've proven yourself the man for the job. Wade's mind raced. The position offered was prestigious far beyond anything he'd ever aspired to. It would mean resources and authority he currently lacked as a town marshal. But it would also mean leaving Rattlesnake Ridge, leaving Violet. I'm honored by your confidence, Governor, Wade said carefully, but my responsibilities here are commendable, Hammond finished for him, but ultimately limited. As Chief Marshal, you could protect not just one town but the entire territory. He lowered his voice conspiratorially. Between us, there's talk of statehood within a few years. Men who distinguish themselves now will find opportunities in the new state government. Mayor Wilson, hovering nearby, could barely contain his excitement. What an honor for Rattlesnake Ridge, our very own marshal, elevated to territorial authority. Wade excused himself from the conversation, needing time to process the unexpected offer. He stepped outside the town hall into the crisp autumn air, his thoughts in turmoil. There you are. Violet's voice drew his attention. She approached from the direction of the schoolhouse, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the evening chill. I heard the governor himself is asking for you. Wade nodded, falling into step beside her as they walked away from the crowded hall. He's offered me a position Chief Territorial Marshal, leading the effort against the Coulter brothers. Violet's steps faltered slightly before she recovered. That's quite an honor. It would mean leaving Rattlesnake Ridge, Wade said, watching her face carefully, traveling throughout the territory possibly for months at a time. Understanding dawned in Violet's eyes. I see. They walked in silence for several moments, the implications hanging between them. Finally, Wade stopped, turning to face her directly. I haven't accepted, he said, and I won't, not without considering what it means for us. Violet studied him, her expression thoughtful. What would you do if I weren't in the equation, Wade? If it were just about the job itself? The question caught him off guard. I don't know. The position offers resources to deal with the Coulters more effectively, to protect more people. He hesitated. But I've never sought authority or recognition. You've sought purpose, though, Violet observed. A reason to stay in one place, to build rather than merely survive. She placed a hand on his arm. I would never ask you to decline an opportunity you truly want. We would find a way to make it work. Her selflessness only confirmed what Wade already knew in his heart. He covered her hand with his own. My purpose is here, with you, with this town we've both chosen. He smiled slightly. I'll help the governor's task force however I can, but from Rattlesnake Ridge, not Helena. Relief and something deeper shone in Violet's eyes. She reached up to touch his face gently. Are you certain? In answer, Wade drew her closer. I've wandered enough for one lifetime, he said softly before kissing her, there in the gathering darkness of an autumn evening in the town that had become his home. The following morning, Wade met with Governor Hammond to decline the territorial position while offering his full cooperation with whoever was appointed. Though clearly disappointed, the governor respected Wade's decision, particularly when Wade outlined his reasons, both professional and personal. I understand loyalty to a community, Marshal Forrester, Hammond said, glancing significantly toward where Violet stood speaking with the newspaper journalist. And to those we care about, but remember, my offer remains open should you reconsider. With that understanding reached, Wade and the governor turned to planning coordinated efforts against the Coulter brothers. The territory would send regular patrols through the region, while Rattlesnake Ridge would serve as a forward base of operations, with Wade sharing his knowledge of the gang's methods and likely hideouts. The governor's visit concluded with a public announcement of these arrangements, presented as a strategic partnership rather than Wade's declining of higher office. The townspeople cheered their marshal's continued commitment to Rattlesnake Ridge, none louder than Mayor Wilson, who recognized the prestige this arrangement brought to the growing settlement. As autumn deepened toward winter, the combined efforts of territorial forces and local vigilance began to yield results. 2 of the Coulter brothers' lieutenants were captured in separate incidents, and a major rustling operation was disrupted before the stolen cattle could be moved across the Idaho border. These successes came at a cost, however. The remaining Coulters, particularly Sela's, grew increasingly desperate and vindictive. Isolated homesteads reported nighttime raids, and travelers were robbed on the roads between settlements. The Outlaws seemed to be sending a message: cross the Coulters, and consequences would follow. Despite these threats, life in Rattlesnake Ridge continued its forward momentum. The railroad spur from Butte was completed in early November, bringing increased commerce and new settlers despite the approaching winter. Violet's school expanded to accommodate additional children, necessitating the hiring of an assistant teacher from Helena. And through it all, Wade and Violet's relationship deepened. Their courtship became the town's favorite topic of gossip, with speculation running rampant about when an engagement might be announced. Wade had indeed purchased a ring, a modest but elegant band with a small diamond, carrying it in his pocket for weeks while waiting for the perfect moment. That moment arrived unexpectedly in early December. A heavy snowfall had blanketed Rattlesnake Ridge overnight, transforming the frontier town into a pristine wonderland of white. Wade and Violet had spent the evening at the schoolhouse, where a community gathering celebrated the completion of a new wing financed by silver mine investors. As they walked back toward the boarding house, snow crunching beneath their boots and their breath visible in the cold night air, Wade was struck by how completely his life had changed in the months since he'd ridden into town. pursued by Blackwell's men. "You're unusually quiet tonight," Violet observed, her arm linked with his. "Thinking about the Coulters again," Wade shook his head. "Not for once, no. I was thinking about the day we met, about how close I came to riding out of Rattlesnake Ridge without looking back." "I'm very glad you didn't," Violet replied, smiling up at him. "Though I could have done without the gunfight as an introduction." They stopped beneath the pine tree in the town square, its branches weighted with snow. The full moon illuminated the scene with an almost magical quality, the town silent and peaceful around them. "I never expected to find a home again," Wade said softly. "After the war, after my time with the army, I convinced myself that drifting was my natural state." He turned to face her fully. "You changed that, Violet. You gave me a reason to stay, to build something that might last." Her eyes widened as Wade reached into his coat pocket, withdrawing the small box he'd carried for weeks. He opened it to reveal the ring inside, a simple diamond catching the moonlight. "I can't offer you an easy life," Wade continued, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. "The Coulters are still out there, and other dangers will always exist on the frontier. But I can promise to face whatever comes beside you, to build a life together here in the home we've both chosen." He took a deep breath. "Violet Harrington, will you marry me?" Tears glistened in Violet's eyes, but her smile was radiant. "Yes, Wade Forrester, yes, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, his own hands trembling slightly with emotion he'd once believed himself incapable of feeling. When he kissed her there beneath the snow-laden pine, Wade knew with absolute certainty that his years of wandering were over. He had found where he belonged. News of their engagement spread through Rattlesnake Ridge with the speed only possible in a small frontier community. Congratulations poured in from townspeople and territorial officials alike, including a personal letter from Governor Hammond that arrived by the next stagecoach. The couple set a wedding date for the spring, when travel would be easier for Violet's few remaining relatives from the east. In the meantime, life continued its steady rhythm, punctuated by occasional reports of Coulter gang activities in the region. The first substantial break in the case against the Outlaws came in January, when a former gang member surrendered himself to territorial authorities in Helena, offering information in exchange for leniency. Wade traveled there despite the winter conditions, spending 3 days interviewing the informant alongside territorial marshals. He returned to Rattlesnake Ridge with valuable intelligence. The location of the Coulters' main hideout in a remote canyon near the Idaho border, the identities of corrupt officials who had been protecting them, and most importantly, the gang's plans for a major offensive once spring arrived. "They're planning to hit several towns simultaneously," Wade reported to a joint meeting of town officials and territorial representatives. "Rattlesnake Ridge included. Silas Coulter has apparently taken our defiance personally." The news sobered the gathering, but there was determination rather than defeat in their response. Throughout the remainder of winter, preparations intensified. Additional weapons and ammunition were stockpiled, defensive positions improved, and communications established with neighboring settlements. Through it all, Wade and Violet continued planning their future. They purchased land on the outskirts of town, where Wade began constructing a home during breaks between his marshal duties. Violet expanded her curriculum and organized a town library, determined that Rattlesnake Ridge would offer cultural advantages despite its frontier location. Their wedding was scheduled for April 15, 1884, to be held in the newly completed church with the territorial judge officiating. As the date approached, even the lingering threat of the Coulters couldn't dampen the town's enthusiasm for the celebration. It represented more than just the union of two people. It symbolized Rattlesnake Ridge's transformation from a rough mining camp to a permanent community with a future. 2 weeks before the wedding, Wade received an urgent telegram from the territorial marshal's office. The message was brief but significant. "Coulter moving early, forces gathering near Beaverhead, expect action within days." Wade immediately called an emergency meeting of the town's defense committee. "The Coulters are mobilizing sooner than expected," he informed them grimly. "We need to accelerate our preparations and alert nearby settlements." For the next 48 hours, Rattlesnake Ridge hummed with activity. Additional sentries were posted on all approaches to town. Women and children were instructed to be ready to shelter in the stone schoolhouse and church if an attack came. Riders were dispatched to outlying homesteads, warning them to come into town or be prepared to defend themselves. Violet worked alongside Wade, organizing provisions and medical supplies, her practical nature asserting itself in the face of danger. If she harbored fears about their wedding being disrupted or worse, she kept them private, focusing instead on what needed to be done. On the third morning following the telegram, Wade was awakened before dawn by urgent pounding on his door. One of the sentries stood outside, breath visible in the pre-dawn chill, riders approaching from the west, marshal, at least 20, moving fast. Wade dressed quickly, buckling on his gun belt as he headed for the town's western approach. The defense committee members were already gathering, alerted by the ringing of the church bell, the prearranged signal for potential danger. In the gray light of approaching dawn, Wade could make out the dust cloud raised by numerous horses, still a mile or so from town. He dispatched runners to ensure all defensive positions were manned, then waited, rifle in hand, as the riders drew nearer. "Should we fire a warning shot?" asked the blacksmith, who had proven himself one of the town's better marksmen during practice sessions. Wade shook his head. "Not yet, something's not right." As the riders came into clearer view, Wade realized what had bothered him. They weren't approaching in battle formation, and there were no weapons visibly drawn. Instead, they appeared to be escorting a wagon, not an attack force, but a convoy. "Hold your fire," Wade ordered as recognition dawned. "Those are territorial marshals." Indeed, as the group drew closer, Wade could make out the distinctive badges and uniforms of the territorial law enforcement. The lead rider hailed them as they approached the town limits. "Marshal Forrester, we bring news from Governor Hammond." Wade stepped forward to meet the convoy as it entered Rattlesnake Ridge. The lead marshal, a grizzled veteran named Hartley, whom Wade had met during his trip to Helena, dismounted with evident weariness. "Apologies for the early arrival," Hartley said, shaking Wade's hand. "We've been riding most of the night to reach you." "What news?" Wade asked, noting the heavy guard around the wagon. Hartley's weathered face broke into a rare smile. "The best kind. We've captured Silas Coulter and most of his lieutenants. Caught them in their hideout near Beaverhead, thanks to your informant's intelligence." The news was so unexpected that it took Wade a moment to absorb it. "All of them? Silas and 4 others in the wagon there," Hartley confirmed, nodding toward the heavily guarded vehicle. 2 more dead after they chose to resist. A few escaped, including one of the younger Coulter brothers, but their organization is effectively finished." As word spread through Rattlesnake Ridge, people emerged from their homes despite the early hour, gathering to witness the arrival of the notorious outlaws who had threatened their town for months. When the wagon passed, revealing Silas Coulter in shackles, a spontaneous cheer erupted. Wade found Violet at the edge of the crowd, her expression a mixture of relief and disbelief. "Is it really over?" she asked as he reached her side. "The main threat, yes," Wade replied, slipping an arm around her waist. "There may be stragglers seeking revenge, but the Coulter Gang as an organization is finished." The territorial marshals continued toward Butte with their prisoners after a brief rest, leaving Rattlesnake Ridge to absorb the sudden lifting of the cloud that had hung over them since summer. Impromptu celebrations broke out across town, the relief of averted danger combining with pride that their community had stood firm against the threat. That evening, Wade and Violet walked along the creek behind the schoolhouse, their usual path now awakening with the first green shoots of spring. The tension that had become so familiar had drained from Wade's shoulders, replaced by a lightness he could scarcely remember feeling before. 2 weeks until our wedding, Violet mused, her hand comfortably entwined with his. And now, no outlaw gang threatening to interrupt the ceremony. It seems almost too perfect, Wade laughed, the sound coming easier than it once had. Don't say that too loudly. The frontier has a way of creating new challenges just when you think you're safe. True, Violet acknowledged with a smile, but we've faced challenges before, together. She stopped walking, turning to face him fully. That's what I want most about our marriage, Wade. Not safety or security, but partnership facing whatever comes as one. Wade drew her closer, still amazed at how completely this woman had transformed his life in less than a year. From a drifter with no attachments to a man with a home, a community, and a future full of purpose. Together, he agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss as the spring sun set behind the mountains that cradled Rattlesnake Ridge. Their wedding day dawned clear and mild, the Montana spring in full bloom across the valley. Rattlesnake Ridge had outdone itself preparing for the occasion, with decorations adorning the main street and the church filled beyond capacity. Wade stood at the altar, uncharacteristically nervous in his new suit, as the small-town orchestra began playing. The church doors opened to reveal Violet in a gown of ivory silk, her auburn hair crowned with spring wildflowers. As she walked toward him on the arm of Mayor Wilson, standing in for her late father, Wade felt a certainty that transcended all his years of wandering. The territorial judge conducted the ceremony with dignity and surprising warmth, speaking of frontiers, both geographical and personal, of the courage required to build a life in uncertain lands, and the greater courage needed to open one's heart after hardship. When Wade and Violet exchanged their vows, their voices carried clearly through the hushed church, promises made not just to each other, but to the future they would forge together in the town that had brought them together. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the judge concluded. Marshal Forrester, you may kiss your bride. The cheer that erupted when Wade did so threatened to lift the church roof, the townspeople celebrating not just a union of two people they had come to respect and love, but a symbolic confirmation that Rattlesnake Ridge itself had a future worth building. The reception that followed lasted well into the night, with music, dancing, and more food than the small town should reasonably have been able to produce. Governor Hammond himself attended, presenting the couple with a silver tea service engraved with the territorial seal as a wedding gift. Marshal Forrester, the governor said privately during the festivities, I still believe you would make an exceptional territorial official. The offer remains open, especially now that the Coulter threat has been neutralized. Wade glanced across the town hall to where Violet was dancing with the elderly stable master whose assistance had proved crucial during that first gunfight nearly a year ago. Thank you, Governor, but my place is here, Wade replied with certainty. Rattlesnake Ridge may be just one town, but it's home, Hammond nodded, understanding in his eyes. Every territory, every nation is built one community at a time by people who choose to stay and build rather than move on. Your service here matters, Marshal. As the celebration wound down, Wade and Violet slipped away to the home he had built for them on the edge of town, a sturdy two-story structure with wide porches and large windows overlooking the creek and distant mountains. It was still partially unfinished, but it was theirs, a physical manifestation of the future they had chosen together. Welcome home, Mrs. Forrester, Wade said as he carried her across the threshold, the traditional gesture feeling right despite his usual aversion to sentimentality. Violet's eyes shone as she surveyed their home in the lamplight. It's perfect, she whispered, then smiled mischievously. Or it will be once you finish the upstairs bedrooms. Planning ahead, Wade asked, setting her gently on her feet. Always, she replied, drawing him closer. I'm thinking at least 2 children, maybe 3, Wade laughed, happiness bubbling up from some long, untapped source within him. I should warn you, stubbornness runs in the Forrester family. Any children of ours are likely to be strong-willed. With a schoolteacher for a mother and a marshal for a father, I would expect nothing less. Violet's expression grew more serious. Do you ever regret it, staying in one place after so many years of freedom? Wade considered the question honestly. Freedom is an interesting word, he said finally. I thought I was free when I was drifting, answering to no one, but I was actually trapped by old habits, by fear of attachment, by the belief that movement was the only way to stay alive. He drew her into his arms. This you, this town, this life we're building, this is real freedom. The freedom to choose, to build, to love. Their life together unfolded with the changing seasons of the Montana Territory. Rattlesnake Ridge continued to grow, the railroad bringing new settlers and opportunities. The silver mine expanded operations, and a small college was established in 1886, with Violet appointed as its first female administrator alongside her continuing role as head teacher at the school. Wade remained marshal, his reputation ensuring that Rattlesnake Ridge rarely faced serious criminal threats. Occasionally, he assisted territorial authorities with particularly challenging cases, always returning home to Violet with stories, and, sometimes, minor injuries that she tended with loving exasperation. Their first child, a son named James, arrived in the spring of 1885, followed by a daughter, Elizabeth, 2 years later. In 1889, as Montana prepared for statehood, Violet gave birth to their third child, another boy they named Daniel. The former drifter found himself surrounded by family, embedded in community. His wandering days transformed into stories he told his children on winter evenings beside the fireplace he had built with his own hands. Sometimes, on clear nights, Wade would stand on the porch of their completed home, looking out at the stars that had once been his only constant companions. Violet would often join him, slipping her hand into his in comfortable silence. Any regrets? She asked on one such evening, echoing the question from their wedding night years earlier. Wade pulled her close, his marshal's badge catching the moonlight as he moved. Only that I almost rode past Rattlesnake Ridge that day, he admitted. If Blackwell's men hadn't been so persistent, if you hadn't arrived on that stagecoach at exactly the right moment. If I hadn't brought you that coffee, Violet finished with a smile, the memory still clear despite the passing years. The best cup I've ever had, Wade affirmed, kissing her forehead. Worth fighting off every outlaw in the territory for. They stood together on the porch of the home they had built, the town they had helped shape spread before them in the valley, their children sleeping peacefully inside. Wade Forrester, who had once measured his life in miles traveled and bullets dodged, now counted his blessings in moments shared and futures planned. He had fought off outlaws alone until Violet handed him that coffee and with it, a reason to stay that had grown into reasons to live, to love, to build a legacy that would outlast them both in the land they had chosen to call home.